Fundsupermart.com.
Hi, Rafael. What is the outlook for the Brazilian equity market over the next 2 to 3 years?
We remain with a positive outlook for the next 2 to 3 years to Brazil, which is the mid-long term. And why? First, because we see that domestic demand growth is the main driver for the Brazilian equity market performance, and we see that domestic demand will keep growing as it's a consequence of structural transformation that the country is passing through, with more and more people join the middle class. Also, regarding the FX market, we foresee that the market should be more or less stable, close into the range where it's trading now. So the FX also should be a component with neutral impact in the equity market. And finally, the Brazilian Stock Exchange has an important component of commodity companies. And we think that the global outlook is positive to commodities because global growth will keep improving slowly, but will keep improving. And the monetary policy, which has been taken by the G4, where the central banks are expanding the balance sheet, is supportive for risk taking and risk appetite, and it's supported for commodities. And we think this should remain more or less the same for the next 2 to 3 years. So everything together put us a positive outlook for Brazil.
The Brazilian government seems to have some trouble balancing its inflation and economic growth. What are your views on this matter, and what is the impact for investors?
Inflation, it's always a big question when it's regarding to Brazil. And I believe that it has more to do with historical reasons of the country. Brazil has passed through a hyperinflation process in the 80s and early in the 90s. It is a problem, but if you look for the inflation target regime in Brazil, since 2005, the country has succeeded to meet the inflation target. So it's quite a long time now where we are sticking to control inflation very well. But I believe also that since the 2008 crisis, the world started to look indifferent from the balance between growth and inflation. It's more or less the same in Brazil, where growth started to become more relevant than it was compared to inflation in the past. And the Brazilian government is doing more or less of the same of that. I mean, we are trying to look for higher growth rates and accepting a little bit higher inflation. And I think this outlook will remain in the mid-long term, at least for 1 or 2 years, while the Brazilian government implements their project to increase investment rate in the country. So I don't think this is a big issue. It's more or less a temporary issue that the country will face. It means when it goes to Brazil, people get a little bit more scared about inflation. But inflation is under control, and growth, it's a good pace.
Despite these inflation headwinds, what are the reasons for investors to invest in Brazil?
Well, first reason I think that is Brazil is the sixth largest world economy. So it's important by itself to be considered as an investment in the investment universe. But it is a country where you have an average GDP per capita of $13,000 which is a reasonable level, and with a growing middle class. From 2002 to 2009, about 30 million people joined the middle class in Brazil, and they joined the middle class, but their income is also growing. So the domestic demand plays an important role in Brazil, which is still a little bit a closed economy, with the imports and exports representing not a big amount of the GDP. The country has also some solvency indication that has improved recently. For example, the international reserve achieved about 15% of GDP, which accounts to $350 billion. And the country has no net external debt. I mean, the reserves, it's higher than the debt, international debt that the country has. Public debt is declining to about 36%, the net public debt last year in 2011. The country has been succeeding in doing their primary fiscal surplus target, which is 3.1% of GDP. So it's a country where the solvency indication is improvement, and the country has already achieved the investment grade, the second step of investment grade. And finally, the declining trend of interest rate in Brazil, which is a long-term trending, started in 2002 and going until now, is very supportive for the equity market.
The Brazilian equity market has rallied approximately 20% in SGD terms since the start of the year. Do you think this is sustainable, and is it too late for investors to start investing in Brazil if they have not already done so?
Valuation of Brazilian market is close to the 5-year average valuation. So it's not a cheap price, but it's a fair price. Let's put it this way. So I think it's not too late if you consider that there's good mid-long-term perspective. But there is, of course, some room for correction. The rally was really quick, and we expect that there may be some correction in the short term, but the mid-long-term trend it's quite positive, and valuation is not expensive. So it's not too late to buy the Brazilian story now.